Today I'm going to be talking to you about double pointed needles, or DPNs. These are needles that have two pointed ends, and they're used for knitting tubes, and usually small ones, so for socks, sleeves, hats, after you've done some decreases. Sometimes in a pattern it will say, after you've worked a certain number of decreases, switch to double pointed needles when you no longer have enough stitches to work comfortably around. So you'll notice that if you're decreasing on a circular needle, eventually you'll have not enough stitches to stretch all the way around it. So you want to switch to these double pointeds. And when you're working on these, you have stitches cast on, distributed evenly over 3 or 4 needles. If you're working from 3, you have them arranged kind of like a triangle, and your stitches are there, and you're working with this empty needle. If you're working with 4, you have them arranged almost like a square, and then you have your 5th needle working the stitches off of each needle, and you're just working one needle at a time, so it's not more intimidating than regular knitting. Okay, so I've got my stitches. I've actually got 21 stitches here, and I'm just going to take an empty needle, and I'm going to slip from the edge of the knitting, the cast on row that doesn't have the working yarn coming from it, so here's the working yarn. I'm just going to slip over 7 stitches, slipping them purlwise. When I'm at the end of that, I'm going to take another needle and I'm going to slip 7 more. Okay, now I have my stitches distributed evenly around the 3 needles, and I'm going to take a 4th right here, and this is the one I'm going to use to knit with. So you can see this is going to be a really small diameter tube, probably about the size of a baby sock. So what you want to do to start working, and just so you know, this is the first row of circular small diameter knitting. It's awkward for everyone, regardless of how long you've been knitting. So what you're going to do is take the empty needle and stick the needle, as usual, into the first stitch on this needle here. And then just knit with the working yarn. And try to keep it nice and tight, or else you might get some pulling and a little bit of a gap. It's what's called a ladder. So you're just going to continue to knit across all the stitches in this needle until they've all been used up. And see why it's awkward? All the needles are kind of waving around. But don't think of them too much. They're not really going to go anywhere. I like bamboo needles for this. Metal ones tend to get heavy and kind of drop out of the knitting sometimes. That's a little alarming. Okay, so I've gotten to the end of those stitches, and now I have a free needle. So you're just going to turn the knitting and do the same thing you just did with the stitches on this needle. So you're basically knitting in a really slow spiral. And it gets faster and less awkward after the first few rows, I promise. So, empty needle. We're almost all the way around our first round. Okay, now I'm back at my first stitch of the round, my first needle, and you can tell that it is that one because the little tail is hanging down. I'm going to use that as my round marker for now. You can stick a marker either on this stitch or just to mark that you've already gone one way around, because as you'll notice, there's no wrong side rows. You're never turning the work over and working a purl row. You're just going to continue to knit all the way around. This is also another great way to get stockinette stitch without purling. So now I'm a few rounds into my knitting, and the needles are flopping around a lot less. They do click together a bit, but it's not too bothersome. And they just kind of stay put when I'm not working with them. Watch the ends, make sure that stitches don't fall off the tips. And just crank along. till you've emptied one needle, and then you just move right on to the next. You want to be careful in these transitions between needles right here. You can get something called ladders, where if you're too loose right here, so when you make this first stitch, just wrap the yarn as you usually do, but maybe a little bit tighter, or give it a tug after you're done making the stitch, and just work the next stitch, just to avoid kind of a loose ladder of stitches that runs all the way down. It sort of looks like a run in pantyhose. Another thing people do to prevent runs, or ladders rather, is every few rounds, if you want to, you can slip the stitches, slip 2 over from this needle to this one, and repeat the same action all the way around. What it does is it just reorients the starting point, so you're not always switching from one needle to the next at the same point. So you can see I've got my tube going. It's not going to need any sewing. It's going to be completely tubular. This is a perfect way to knit socks, sleeves, toys, lots of things. So don't be afraid of double pointed needles.